Hi, I'm Kevin Rogers, and you're listening to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. It's no secret that public education finds its roots in the Christian faith. If you study the history of almost any Canadian university, you're going to find that there were clergy and prominent Christian community builders that believed that education held the keys to greater knowledge and wisdom. Christian faith is built on curiosity and wonder about all of creation and unveiling its mysteries. But today, if you walk onto the campuses of Canadian universities, you may need to look harder to find a place for Christian faith. Building on a history of campus chaplaincy, Christian outreach, discipleship groups, we're seeing a resurgence of gospel witness and Christian community emerging as heaven's counterculture in the midst of an often hostile environment. My guests today can speak directly to the relevance of Jesus in the halls of education. I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves today and tell about their role as a campus worker. And so I think we'll start with British Columbia and make our way east. And so John Engels is up. John, hello and welcome, and tell us about your role with campus ministry.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having us here, and really looking forward to sharing around this virtual screen today. As you mentioned, my name is John, and I am the National Coordinator for Serve Campus Network, which we have a few friendly faces here from the network today. And I'm also a part-time chaplain at Kwantlen Polytechnic University here in Surrey. And most of what I've been doing for the past 2 years, 4 months about, is just been getting to know faculty and staff and some students. Of course, the pandemic hit, and that kind of put a stop on a lot of forward momentum stuff with students. So even today, I have an event with KPU virtually on climate change. So it's a multi-faith perspective on climate change. So you just never know like what you're going to be asked to be part of in that kind of environment. So anyway, that's just a little bit about me. And I live here in Surrey, BC.
And John, as the Mission Canada campus worker, you oversee people doing campus ministry from coast to coast. In your numbers, how many people are involved in campus ministry, at least from the Pentecostal Assembly's perspective?
Right. Well, we have campus missionary people like that are around the table here. We also have faculty and staff who volunteer. We have church staff as well. And so all told, we're somewhere probably around 75 people engaged. I've kind of lost count at that point. It keeps kind of morphing out. I know it's larger than that, actually. I'm not including many other people that have come on board since, but and about 46 campuses presently, from all the way from Newfoundland to University of Victoria.
That's certainly a significant number of people and campuses that work is happening on. How many? How much more room is there in your? Do you think how many workers could there be on how many campuses?
Well, right now, there's several solo workers that really want some team members to join them, and so we could easily double our numbers, and easily double the number of campuses that we're on. So we have 2.1 million students across Canada in post-secondary schools, and we are approximately on right now campuses representing about 1 million students. And so you can tell just by those sheer demographics how much further we have to go.
Um, Next, we're going to meet Millie Lee, and I think I've met everybody else. I have met everybody else before, but I've never met Millie. So, hi, Millie. I'm Kevin. I'm the host of the podcast, and I'm curious to know who you are and tell us about where you are and what you're up to.
Nice to meet you, Kevin. My name is Millie. I work for Univer-City Christian Ministries at SFU, Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, Vancouver, in BC. I've been working here for more than 7 years now. I'm in my 8th year. I'm the director for the ministry there.
All right, and then we're going to move over to Alberta and meet Kelly Johnson. Hi, Kelly.
Good to be with you. I did my undergrad at University of Calgary, and then came back after teaching for a few years, and I oversee university campus ministries at U of C, Mount Royal University, and SAIT. We have other students from other campuses that join us sometimes too, but it's lots of people. Calgary is known as more of a commuter campus, so people live all over within Calgary and outside of Calgary and commute in when we have classes in. And but there are a lot of international students, and there are a lot of housing residences both on campus and nearby campus. So some people don't really go very far at all from campus, but I know even at the University of Calgary, I was just thinking this morning how our university seeks to be engaged in the community, and we have different locations around the city. And so there are opportunities, I think, when things happen in Calgary that we are invited into. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing and learning from my colleagues here and from you as well on how we can engage with the larger, not just campus community, but how it impacts our cities.
All right, we're going to fly over the Prairie Provinces and land down at Toronto Airport on Toronto Island. We're going to cross over to mainland downtown Toronto and up Yonge Street to Ryerson University. Hello, Jazelle. Tell us about what's going on at Ryerson and who you are.
Hey, Kev. I'm Jazelle Johnson. I work at Ryerson University in a ministry called Lifeline alongside David Burke, who's the pastor, and I'm on staff. And our goal is to reach the 44,000 students that come from all over the world at Ryerson University to, bring prodigal sons and daughters back home. And so that's our mission. We have a community of students and on a journey to find, follow, and serve Jesus Christ. And so we meet on Tuesdays for services, and we have Bible studies that we do. We do socials, we do Red Frogs, outreach, all that fun stuff, and to engage the campus of the 44,000 students.
And you mentioned David Burke. David was one of our guests on the podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody that wants to hear another podcast that talks about campus ministry, particularly at Ryerson. Let's hop on our bicycle and make a trip down the 401 to Montreal. Meet David Ritz. Hi, David.
Hello. Yeah, the other day my son asked me actually how long it would take to walk to Toronto from Montreal, and we figured it would probably take 14 days of straight walking to get there. But yeah, my name is David Ritz, originally from Alberta, and then God brought us here in 2006 and 2007. Fell in love with the city, fell in love with the culture that's here, and met my wife as well, proposed on Mount Royal. And in the greater Montreal area, there's probably about 250,000 post-secondary education students within the area, one of the highest demographics, second only to Boston. We like to compete with Boston for that stat. And so I oversee Red Frogs, which keeps us pretty busy at Mcgill. And we've been able to do some things for students outside of the Mcgill University as well. Had our first CEGEP event this year. And in case you're wondering what CEGEP is, it's unique to Quebec. It's kind of, they do their grade 12 year high school and kind of a prep / trade / community college time at CEGEP. So it's basically just a really cheap way for students to test waters in an area of study. So so that we do that. And I also am the staff associate with the Christian Medical and Dental Association for the med students at McGill as well. So yeah.
Montreal is an amazing place, and it's no wonder that you have 250,000 post-secondary students there. That's interesting. If you think about all of our major universities tend to land in an urban center, and sometimes the population of a university and its affiliates numbers in the tens of thousands, and or in your case 250,000. And that's sizable, and there's often around a campus very much of a whole infrastructure of shops and restaurants and security and all kinds of services. It's as if there is a city within the city. And so is it fair to say that a lot of students, spend their lives within a campus city? Tell me about your observations of that community, that city within the city. What's it look like where you are? Who wants to go first? Start with you, David.
It's interesting in Montreal, specifically Montreal, because you have a very different culture within a culture, because you have the surrounding Quebec or French culture, and then you have sort of the McGill culture, which is very international. National students come here. It's an Ivy League school. The tuition price point is like excellent for domestic students, and comparable even for international students. So you have that sort of dynamic within the greater context of the French Quebecer culture that's surrounding it. So that's like a really interesting point. But then on the Francophone campuses with some colleagues that I've talked to, the dynamic is different. The CEGEP piece kind of changes the sort of esprit de corps that you would typically find on English campuses. The dynamics are a little bit different. And so by the time they go to University of Montreal or UQAM or places like that, French Quebecer students tend to have already been living on their own. So doesn't have the same sort of student feel that McGill has. There's a specific spot called Mcgill Ghetto that is highly concentrated with students. And you go there between September and April, and it's crawling with students all over the place and into the plateau area. So and I know McGill students have told us about the McGill bubble and how they tend to kind of stay within the sort of plateau McGill downtown area. Even moving here the first time doing my internship, I was like, I don't speak a lot of French. Is that going to be a problem? They're like, yeah, there's like 50,000 students in the downtown area that also don't speak French, so you should be okay. So it's a very interesting question. I'd be curious to know in the other places in Quebec what that dynamic is like, although it's very acute here in Montreal, I would say.
How about somebody else? The city within the city that you're a part of? John, I think you were telling me in a recent conversation about UBC.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff happening at UBC, and Millie, you would know too about some of the stuff that's happening. But if you go back several years, probably 10, 12 years now, you drive up to UBC and you would see promotion about Univer-City, so CITY, also the same at SFU. And it's really true. Like you've got shopping centers, you've got restaurants, you've got family housing right there. A lot of the faculty live in condos, so it has been built up hugely. It's been a lot more people have been brought in as a result of that. So on those two campuses in particular, it really is like a city within a city. It's very self-contained. And I'll let Millie speak to her context, but UBC is actually just bought 3 acres in Surrey, and Surrey is the largest growing city in BC right now. It'll soon surpass Vancouver's population, and so UBC is actually planting another campus in Surrey, right next to SFU Surrey, right next to Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and they're going to bring in somewhere around 10,000 students. And I could go into all that, all the other detail with that, but really, it's again going to be a self-contained kind of high-rise situation with shopping and mall and all this kind of stuff. So we're going more and more in that direction.
Anything to add to that, Millie?
Yeah, no, like at SFU is interesting too because we're on a mountain, so we're like a city on a hill kind of situation. Yeah, like I think there are a lot of international students who are living on the mountain, but we're still actually quite a commuter campus. So yeah, like definitely we have a lot of different, like, I guess, ethnic food on campus. And yeah, and I know that like once it's snowing, basically everyone just stuck together on campus on the mountain. So that's definitely interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Like when you're walking around, maybe a lot of students, they have their own language. You can see them speaking in Mandarin mostly, actually. Yeah, so it is pretty interesting to see that dynamic.
Do you find that now, if we think about the city that the campus city or Univer-City is embedded into, talk about some of the ways that your campus ministries make a contribution to the larger city. Do you have ways that you're leading students in, say, caring for the widows and the orphans, to borrow that scriptural language of people that have very unique challenges? How is campus ministry extending its reach out into the city and the world beyond?
Maybe I'll jump in here. As we were talking about kind of the densification of our campuses, and there is more and more of that around, but University of Calgary and Mount Royal are both kind of out in suburbs. And so it does provide interesting opportunities. Our social work students obviously are concerned about issues. We have quite a push within our campuses, all post-secondary in Calgary, on kind of indigenization of our curriculum and trying to wrestle with what some of the issues are as with some of our population in our cities. I know even just for myself, the one of the discipleship pieces for our students is, a lot of the spiritual disciplines around prayer and different practices, but we also want to emphasize that we have to be engaged with the poor, with the homeless, with people who are different than ourselves. And so we're coming from, generally on our campuses, pretty privileged people. And so whether they're coming from around the world or from our own cities or from rural areas, I don't think the poor, many of them even think about post-secondary because they're not, they're more in survival mode. So we have to work pretty hard at engaging. And I know even just kind of highlight my son's work on campus. He's worked with me. He's fourth year philosophy student now, but somebody challenged him a year and a half or two ago. How can you say you love the poor as a Christian if you don't know anybody's name who's poor? And so that really kind of pierced him, and he's led our ministry in doing some intentional engagement, just getting to know people's names downtown. So they'll go and share, socks or water bottles or granola bars, but then they'll pray about, God, is there somebody on this trip that I'm supposed to take for a meal, just so that we can hear their story more. And this has been, I think, quite a breakthrough for our students in learning that this is part of their spiritual life, is to care for the poor, and maybe they haven't seen them before. And so this has been really encouraging for me, an aspect of engaging with our city. Even just, I know I had a student riding our C train, which is our light rail transit. A few months ago, I heard that somebody kind of was on the train with him who looked like he had had a pretty rough night, and somebody had beaten him up, and his shoes were stolen. And so one of our students who'd been doing some of this downtown, getting to know new friends down there, said, hey, let me take you into the mall here, and we'll get you some shoes. And I don't think he ever would have done that unless he would have explored in a gentle way, some of these weekly opportunities we have to hear the story of people who are downtown, or perhaps even homeless, who are living a little different life than many of them. So that sort of thing is really encouraging for me. It's real life opportunities in our own cities to engage with God's heart for all of us.
What an amazing thing, Kelly, to have your son working with you, and to watch the unique thing that God's doing in his life. What about other places, ways that your campus ministry is taking people beyond the campus boundaries to the city at large? Anybody else doing anything kind of interesting?
Well, I've become good friends with one guy who's doing, he's a street intervention worker here in Montreal, been doing it probably longer than anybody else, I think since the 90s. And he's been a really good resource to talk about how to do that and how to do it well. It can be a little overwhelming in Montreal because there's so much need all around. And I think sometimes for campus ministries, the challenge is yep, we want to be good neighbors, but also there's, there's 500 Christians that are part of churches and campus groups, and there's 45,000 students that go here that also need Jesus. So sometimes I think it can be a little bit overwhelming to try and handle all of it at the same time. So, but there's definitely huge potential. There was just an article, a news story on CBC of this Mcgill girl who crowdfunded a $250,000 campaign or $25,000 campaign of giving jackets out to the homeless. And she basically her dad was a liquidation supplier and was what's going on with all these jackets? So they were able to get 250 jackets at $25 a piece and just hand them out, high quality jackets. So the potential for students to be able to affect good is huge. They have the energy and the excitement. So I think sometimes it's a challenge to help them see and look outside of the sometimes the university bubble and identifying who's called to help lead us in that. But I think that as leaders, it can sometimes be hard when it would be great to do all this, but how do we motivate our leaders to also see the need?
Well, I think in the 4 or 5 years that you have with a student, there's such a tremendous opportunity to model and teach values that they're going to take with them for life. And literally, your student population are global; they're going everywhere in the world. And so, what a unique place each of you are to be able to have an influence on them, so that as they learn to follow Jesus, that gets carried to the ends of the earth. And I mean, hats off to every campus worker for being a part of that, literally a global movement. when we look at the average, say, student who grew up in a church somewhere, they went to youth group perhaps, and they go to university, and there are probably some Christian clubs in schools that are kind of a haven or a hideout for Christians who are on campus, and it becomes their safe place to worship Jesus, to fellowship with other Christians. But how do you go beyond just say catering to the kid who grew up in church and may want to maintain their faith? And I may be somewhat facetious in the question, but is there often an insecurity about leaving home and giving your childhood faith a farewell at the same time? Tell me about what you're encountering among students, certainly the ones the unique challenges for those that are raised in the church, and those who are finding Jesus for the first time. Do you see much difference between the two? What part of the spiritual formation journey are you most involved in, would you say? Who wants to jump in on that one? Go ahead, Kelly.
That's a challenging topic, I think, for all of us. I think I was just telling somebody yesterday on campus that it is a challenge for people who, when they've come from this bubble, they don't feel comfortable coming up even to our faith and spirituality center if they've been in a nice Christian cocoon or Christian school or whatever. So there are some real challenges. For some of them, doing interfaith work or even cross denominations is really hard for some students because it hasn't been modeled for them that God is present, God is at work all around us. And so there is a nervousness, a reluctance sometimes. It doesn't smell right for them to say prayers in a different way or to read a liturgy. And so I think there are some opportunities for us to kind of model a different way of engagement. Some of our multi-denominational and multi-faith opportunities are huge for some students. If they come alive to the ways that God has created them, and maybe they've wrestled with things in their own church, but being on campus has given them an opportunity to struggle with some of those questions and still to be kind of in a safe place, but also to have permission to explore some of those things. So yeah, I don't think you're being facetious. I think there are real challenges. We know that a lot of students from whatever tradition maybe become secularized or something when they go and get outside of their own comfort zone. But I think there's huge opportunities if we travel with them and model some of that. So it's very exciting for me actually to be on a campus and to be able to explore, but to have people who want to, and I don't, like you kind of talked about, oh, maybe that's a hard place in your introduction. I've had people say, oh, how is it doing ministry there in the shadow of the Tower of Mordor? Like they see university as this dark secular place, but I think we have to recognize that God is at work and educate. Our universities were started by people who wanted to see God at work, and that all truth is God's truth. And so I think there is really exciting opportunities for us, and maybe a little bit of it is our different models. So some clubs might be a little huddle, but I think even in chaplaincy, sometimes people see it as maintenance, but there are real opportunities for mission and engagement in a way that vitalizes our faith and sees students propelled out into a lifetime of active and vibrant service.
I love those conversations. Like I love those conversations of even like questions or deconstructing a bit and trying to figure it out. And like I remember one conversation with a person who had been a fairly solid leader, and then we came back from the summertime and we were chatting, and she's like, I don't know. Like, this kid asked, I was a counselor at a camp, and this kid asked me this question about faith, and like I gave the answer that I thought was right, but then it really like tripped me up, and I began thinking about it, and like maybe I'm not as strong in my faith as I thought. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with asking that question. It's a valid question. Like, I love those kind of conversations where you can unpack and sort of be like these safe space to like ask questions of their faith, and telling, like, I think a place like a university can be a great place and a safe place to ask those questions. And I think as campus leaders, reacting in a way that is like, no, that's a valid question, and even something that I've wrestled through too, or are still wrestling through. But here's where I find my peace. Here's where I find my rest. Here's how Jesus can help change that. And here's where I trust that I don't have the answer here. Those are some of my favorite conversations and moments in ministry.
You mentioned, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Millie. Or no, Jazelle. Yeah.
It's all good. I was just going to add on to David's point, just how we can practically engage the students who are, one, left their faith and are still struggling, or two, those who are kind of new or maybe on the fringes, to use that word. One of the ways at Lifeline we've done this from very early on is implement Tough Question Tuesday, which we just call TQT. And we have the students submit questions that they've been struggling with anonymously. So we've done them where they've written them on pieces of paper, they put them in, they submit them about a couple of weeks, because we don't pretend to be all experts, and we don't try to answer a lot of the questions on spot. Some of them take a lot of research. These students ask really intense questions sometimes that require research. But what we do is have them submit their questions anonymously, which removes the pressure of, I'm the one asking the question, I'm the one who's on the spotlight, maybe asking a question about sexuality, maybe asking a question about can I prove if God really exists, those kind of questions that they may not want someone to know that they were the one asking that specific question. So they submit them, and then we usually take about a week or 2 weeks to have the questions come in, and then we sit down together and have a more like an open, David and I answer the questions with the students, and we kind of let them do feedback, ask additional questions, that kind of thing. That's obviously adapted since we've been online this last 2 years. So we do it through a format very similar to this, and students get a chance to kind of engage and type in the chat or talk and ask questions like that. And so it's one of the ways we get students to just get a sense of where they're at spiritually, what kind of questions are they asking, what do they need to learn more about, and what are they what do they hunger for? And so that's one of the ways we've kind of made it more like an open forum where they can kind of share what they want to hear and learn about. So that's kind of how we engage our students, and that actually brings in the most students we've had. And out of all our events, we see students, friends, they'll bring their friends who've never come to faith to hear about questions that they may have, or to kind of have conversations around our family dinners after our service. So stuff like that are great ways to bring people in who have certain questions. And yeah, that's just been really successful for us in terms of reaching students who would never walk into the traditional church setting.
That's really something, Jazelle. You know, I think sometimes when we are trying to reach people and we approach it from, say, the position of apologetics, we come prepared to answer the questions that we think that they will have. But what are actually the questions that surface more often that maybe we're not prepared for? Can you think of a couple of questions that have come up where you were just kind of stymied by it, and maybe others have had this experience as well? What are the questions? What are the big questions that you're seeing?
I mean, for me, every question is always like, wow, didn't think you thought like that. Well, one of them recently we had was on generational curse and generational trauma and sin, which someone asked, is that a biblical concept, or is that something that's secular, that's, kind of everyone that's adapting to it? And we went into like, okay, can we find evidence for like what, the secular world is advocating as generational curses? Is that something that you can find biblically, based on the definition, without going super deep into all of that? Like, that kind of conversation brought up a lot of things about, we have a tendency to repeat our parents' sin. Is that a curse? Not necessarily. No. Maybe some cultures may see it that way, and just by the definition of what some of the secular world looks at generational curses, we do not attribute that to how God sees that. And so those conversations was really interesting, and it took me aback to be like, okay, I gotta look for that in scripture and find maybe examples where you could prove that this is this, or maybe somebody used it out of context, or where have they heard this before? So those kind of questions are always interesting. We had one on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I was like, David, you take that. That's you can own that question. I am not going to fight you for that one. And he did a lot of deep research, which at one point I looked at him and we were sitting across from each other, and he was like, I should wrap up. I'm getting too deep. I'm getting too nerdy now. And I'm like, yeah, you lost us, David. You lost us. So students are asking really, really interesting questions about just, we have one on, for example, why would God put the tree in the garden knowing that Adam and Eve would take from that tree? You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And there's the idea of, God predestined, and we're trying to unpack that for students. Like questions that usually take me aback are things that we might have just grew up in church and we accepted. Like, yes, okay, God is sovereign, God is good. But then if you have someone that might not grew up in that Christian bubble or that faith, and they're like, I understand that if God's sovereign and is good, why is there evil and suffering in this world? And then unpacking that for them and helping them kind of walk through, their own real suffering. So it's not necessarily sometimes the questions that take us aback, but understanding that their context, their experiences come with hurt, come with different lenses that we sometimes as Christians put on and just go, oh yeah, this is how it is. And this is how, God is good, God's faithful. But how do you unpack that for someone who's gone through some deep trauma and pain, or walk through their own lenses? So helping them see that, you can't just slap an amen on everything, and helping them kind of unpack what's really going on here. Where's the root, and how God actually walks you through the suffering. We look at Job, and we look at many people in the Bible, and we help them understand that God is not the root of their suffering, but also he actually takes you through the storm. And so there's so much of that maybe not we as Christians don't really see or naturally kind of think about. How could someone else from a different cultural context or understanding may see God? That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, the world can look so different when you put somebody else's glasses on instead of your own. What about the rest of you? What are some of the surprising questions or the unexpected questions that you're encountering as you're working with students?
Oh, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
I think it's so wide and diverse. Everything from our power and privilege, which different cultural events have spotlighted in the last couple of years, to gender issues, even issues around evolution, right? For some Christian students, actually even Christian faculty. I've been in prayer meetings where, one Christian professor might say, "Oh, I love teaching about evolution here, and this just gets me really excited." And then another Christian professor, "Well, how do you do that?" And because they've only been raised with a young earth philosophy or a church, and even just hearing other Pentecostal people, talk about, well, the research shows that, we have 10,000 years ago, we started living in cities, and, just being excited about different parts of history or of human biology. And then, so a lot of these things are kind of cyclical, and over, a 3 to 8 year span, you might see come around again. But letting students know that there might be a diversity of opinion on people who love Jesus that they have on those issues just kind of lets them take a deep breath and realize that it's not going to be faith shattering if they question some of these things and if they explore different approaches or answers to that. So I found that very helpful, just to let them know that there is a wide variety of Christian engagement on some of these big, challenging topics.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Alpha group that I was helping run this past year. And Millie, I think, was part of it too, that one student from China, one student from Taiwan, and both from completely different backgrounds. One Buddhist, one whose parents are in the Communist Party, atheist, yet they're hungry. And they were bringing back the basic apologetics questions when we were going through the film series called The Chosen and seeing the stories of Jesus. And, the questions would come up about, when Jesus does the miracles, and like, to them, that's just like, wow, that's beyond science. And yet they're very intrigued. Or we talk about human nature and, sin and, what is sin? Some of these basic kinds of concepts that we can just take for granted as Christians and we hear about preached, but for international students who don't know Jesus, they're asking the very honest core questions. And it's so refreshing actually to engage with them, because as you do that, as I did that, I learned more about their culture, and it would cause me to ask questions about their belief system and how they see things. And then we compare and contrast, the two worldviews, and it was like aha moments were happening, and you could see the journey and their hunger for Christ growing, because it was in a safe environment. It wasn't about trying to win an argument. It was about journeying together in this adventure and discovery of what the Bible has to say and who Jesus is. So I just found that to be so refreshing this past year when it comes to just international students who don't know a thing about Jesus or the gospel.
I was thinking, like, probably one of the most surprising questions that I was asked, and like, I was going back to your question about like church students versus like sort of new in their faith. One student who I got to know, he was in charge of outreach and evangelism of a campus group. And he asked me, he's like, I was asked the other day, like, why do I believe in God? And I didn't know, how would you answer that? Well, dude, I can't answer that for you. Like, my response is going to be very different. But I realized in that moment, I'm like, man, he's like looking for like A, B, C, D, E, F. Like, what's the procedural answer for why I believe in Jesus? And I just like turned it back to him. I'm like, man, if you've never wrestled with why you believe in Jesus, it'd be a really good thing for you to wrestle with and to just sit with. One topic that I've noticed comes up a lot is like sex. Why is it, can I live with my boyfriend? Why is that good or bad? Like, I don't understand. Like, why does Jesus care? Do I really need to get married? Does a piece of paper really like indicate my love? Like, and from leaders, I've been asked that question and had to address that topic too, which surprised me, because for me, it's just like, we don't do that, but it's like, having to realize, like, I can't roll my eyes physically. Maybe in my head I can roll my eyes thinking about this question coming up again, but patiently walking with people and walking through why that's important. And I found with medical students, questions are hard for me to wrap my mind around, because the things that they're wrestling with are things like MAID. Can I honestly be a follower of Jesus? What about issues of conscience? How do I live in my faith when I'm going to be expected to do abortion or MAID or refer services? Can I do that? And that's like, that is a hard one for me to really know how to encourage, because I'm not in that field. And so just like, man, like, this is where we need Jesus. This is where we need him to give us the tools that we need to be able to function within our workplace. That I know. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on how we can be encouraged in our faith in that.
Hey, this is Kevin again. Do you know that our podcast now has over 4,200 RSS subscribers? That means that the stories that we're sharing and the interviews that we're having are being heard in many places. A lot of our listeners are Canadian, but we do have about 10% that are from US and 5% from other parts of the world. But you can help us to grow the listenership of the podcast. If you've enjoyed listening to any of these episodes, would you go to our website, sidewalkskylinepodcast.com, and there you can like episodes and you can leave comments. And the more that you share our episodes, the more likes we get, the more comments we receive. That actually affects the algorithms and pushes it out to people that are looking for a podcast to listen to. So help us do that, would you? This is the end of part one of my interview with campus workers. But one thing that I think you can see from listening to them is that there are campus workers that believe Jesus is worth knowing and that students need a good introduction to Jesus. I'm so proud of so many great campus workers across the nation that are role modeling what it means to be a solid disciple, a solid follower of Jesus. Well, on our next episode, part two of my conversation with our campus workers, we're going to be talking about one thing that is the awakening of conscience. And as we look at the issues that are so important to young lives, we see the awakening of conscience. And what does that mean? And then also looking at some of the impacts of deconstruction and how that is having an effect on people that grow up in the church. And then also we want to talk about rebuilding after all the pandemic restrictions. So come on back and listen to our next episode. And until that time, I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. Keep one ear to the sky and one ear to the ground. This is Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.